Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Octane session today on enabling trusted digital experiences with a unified identity. We're joined today by our guest speaker, Mike Towers, the Chief Information Security Officer at Takeda. Last year, Mike joined us at Octane to tell us about Takeda ID, which is an initiative that he kicked off to centralize customer identity in order to enable digital experiences and deeper relationships with their patients, their physicians, and their healthcare providers. Now, trust is definitely important in these types of experiences. Patients are engaging with very personal information and often emotional occurrences in their life. So, trust is critical, and Mike is going to tell us about how identity played a role in enabling these experiences by making sure that they were absolutely certain who was on the other side of the screen. So please join the discussion. You can add reactions and comments into the chat, and we will address those after the presentation. And with that, Mike, I will pass it over to you.
Thanks, Christie. Yeah, hi, everybody. Mike Towers here. I'm the CISO of Takeda Pharmaceuticals. And as Christie mentioned, I spoke last year on Takeda ID, but today I'm going to give a quick update on where we are and how it is truly enabling us to offer and assure a trusted digital experience for our external stakeholders, whether they be healthcare practitioners, patients, or caregivers. So a quick rundown of Takeda, for those of you who may not be familiar with the company. We are the oldest pharmaceutical company in the world. We were founded roughly the same month that the US Constitution was written. So we're coming up on our 240th birthday. And we are with a recent acquisition of Shire. It's actually about 2 years ago now. We are roughly number 8 or number 9 in the world, depending on which metric you use to measure the size of the corporation. But we're operating in about 100 countries. We have some primary therapeutic areas, such as oncology, gastrointestinal, neuroscience. We also have a rare disease practice and a vaccine practice. And we are also have a business unit called plasma-derived therapies. We are a Japanese headquartered company with major US operations out of the Boston area. And we also have a European headquarters in Zurich, and we have an emerging markets headquarters in Singapore. But we are operating as a global trust-based pharmaceutical company, very science-driven. And we have, interestingly enough, recently updated our corporate philosophy to reflect, in no small part, reinforce the importance of trust, which is one of our core pillars, if you will, for the company: patient, trust, reputation, and business, by design in that order. But we've also recently added a pillar to our overall corporate philosophy about unlocking the power of data and digital. So, as I'm sure we can all attest to, as we are all, frankly, patients, we all engage with the healthcare sector on a daily basis. And healthcare comprises multiple different subgroups, if you will. There's the doctors and the hospitals and the clinics that you visit. There's insurance, there's medical devices, and then there's biopharmaceuticals. And one of the things that's occurring across the entire industry, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later, is how important data and digital is becoming to more efficiently caring for patients and more effectively helping people manage their health on an ongoing basis. And Takeda is committed to that. We are committed to being the most data-driven and outcomes-based biopharmaceutical company. And we're going to talk a little bit later about how Takeda ID has helped us on that vision.
Thanks for that, Mike. So there definitely is huge potential for digital to transform healthcare and life sciences. So what have you observed in your experience? What trends are impacting from a technology perspective as well as from an industry perspective?
Yeah, it's a great question, Christy. So one of the things that we've seen and we're managing towards, and again, I think it's something that we all may work in different industries, but we all are patients and we all have family that are probably dealing with certain health issues, or even just doing ongoing health management if we're lucky enough to be overall healthy people. But the entire industry is ripe for innovation and ripe for better data and digital support end to end. So we have everything from an HCP shortage to more advanced technologies. This is an area that you're seeing a lot of technologies from companies like Apple, Google, Amazon, companies that 4 years ago probably you would have never thought of as a healthcare company. But it's important to realize how digital and data has become a really, really important way to help better enable healthcare and all facets of healthcare. And biopharmaceuticals part of the industry is no different. We're trying to leverage that trend and we're trying to support it. And I think that we'll talk a little bit about how COVID has exacerbated this and required us to really start thinking about what are the better opportunities for things like telemedicine, what can be done more virtually, what can be done more digitally. I think you think about when you visit your physician or you go to some sort of an appointment, there's always a lot of in-person reliance. But the industry overall is moving a little bit where, and again, COVID exacerbated this, where we need to be more comfortable getting care and managing our health digitally, whether it's seeing doctors, whether it's registering for maybe new medicines. And all of this has to be done in an environment where you can still maintain a level of trust. Of course, everybody's healthcare conditions and everybody's healthcare information is very, very sensitive and private. So all of that has to be maintained. And there also is, frankly, a lot of regulations in this area that vary based on market, based on geography. Heck, in the US, it even varies based on state. So all of these trends and these issues that are moving, and the healthcare sector, frankly, as important as it is, it's unfortunately been highly inefficient. When you have all the various pieces of healthcare, which frankly rarely talk together from a systems perspective, even traditionally. So now here we are in this digital world where we're trying to stitch those things together as well. So there's enormous opportunity to help people get better healthcare and get better and more efficient healthcare by leveraging data and digital technology. And one of the other areas that we're seeing, frankly, is that we have to be able to support not only those folks that are getting treatment, but maybe those folks that need treatment and don't know it yet. So there's elements of things like medical devices, for example, where maybe you have a diagnostic condition where, in the past, again, if you were being tested for a treatment or tested for a condition, you'd have to go to a clinic. But many of us wear an iWatch or a Fitbit, or there are other medical devices that are out there that can allow you to be sharing more of this data in real time and potentially having better and quicker indicators of a disease state or a medical condition that potentially one of our products or one of our treatment options can help with. So, and let's face it, all of this comes with an extraordinary new responsibility to protect. So the biopharmaceutical industry, for example, historically has dealt with hospitals and medical practices and physicians. And we obviously deal with insurance companies and payers as well, because that's how a lot of our products are paid for. But this whole new world, as we transition, if you will, from treatment delivery to ongoing health management, it puts biopharmaceutical companies in more direct contact with patients and caregivers. And that takes an extraordinary responsibility to make sure that those sessions are protected, and not just protecting the data, but also making sure that those experiences collectively can be trusted, whether it's your participation in a clinical trial or your exchange and your discussion about your symptoms and your treatments with your physician. All of those things, it's important that we have a level of trust that folks can have that same level of comfort doing this digitally as they may have done potentially going into the office or going into a clinic. And all of that requires a good foundation of governance from companies like ours and across the ecosystem, frankly, because it's also very important that the healthcare, various parts of healthcare work together in this regard.
It's a huge amount of change that's underway. And with Takeda being a nearly 240-year-old company, I'm sure it's gone through a number of transformations. Can you tell us a little bit, Mike, about how is identity supporting this massive shift and all of these digital initiatives that Takeda is undertaking?
Yeah, it's actually something, Christie, that we're really, really excited about within Takeda. Our CEO has featured prominently in certain discussions on this regard. And as I mentioned before, it is now even one of the pillars of our overall corporate philosophy is to do this more natively and leveraging it more directly. And you'll hear a term in the pharmaceutical industry called outcomes based. So what does outcomes-based mean? Well, let's face it, the pharmaceutical business model historically has been based on the number of prescriptions that are written. And of course, that's a good metric to use because if your medicines are effective, they'll be prescribed more. But is it really outcomes based? Probably not, because, well, definitely not, because the outcome of any medicine should be an improvement in the disease condition or in the whatever state, medical state that the treatment is for. So outcomes based basically means, can we shift the industry to be more based on measuring and assuring that our treatments are actually working, symptoms are improving, disease conditions are improving. So all of that, again, is fundamentally based on having good and real-time access to the data and leveraging digital tools to exchange that data and access that data. So what you see on the screen here is basically Takeda's 5 priority areas for our digital strategy. 3 of which you could argue are, quote unquote, user facing, and then 2 are more back end technology enablers. But first and foremost is real world evidence. Real world evidence, as I said before, being outcomes based. So real world evidence is basically leveraging all the data that you can get and use to do ongoing management of various parts of the business value chain. So early on in the business value chain, real world evidence is about clinical trials and making sure that your medicines are tested properly. And you can do things like virtual clinical trials, because again, historically, clinical trials required you to show up at a clinic and do things in person. But are there opportunities to leverage data and digital to do that more virtually? If you start to talk about a condition like Parkinson's, for example, or Alzheimer's, these patients who sorely need new treatment options, getting them to go to a clinic to participate in a clinical trial is quite cumbersome and quite obstructive. So having options to do that digitally is really, really important. The next area is patient engagement. So how do we get our patients to have an ongoing relationship with Takeda as the provider of important treatments? We have big products in areas like ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease, where those types of conditions, there's a lot of ongoing support that's needed, a lot of ongoing engagement that's needed. Oncology is another area where ongoing support and ongoing engagement is quite important. So again, doing that digitally. I mean, we all digitally interact with our airlines, with our music provider, with our shopping. So why not have the same level of digital interaction with folks providing us treatment? So that's about the patient care and patient engagement. And the last area is about diagnostics. So I mentioned before that we are in the business of rare diseases. Rare diseases, as their name infers, are quite challenging. There's rare diseases out there that we deal with that many doctors have never even seen before. And patients can go 5, 6, 8, 10 years without being properly diagnosed. So can we leverage data and digital to help get those diagnoses quicker? Look at the data, look at the health patterns, look at the symptom patterns, look at other indicators that can help us get and make a decision about diagnostics more quickly. And those 3 areas are fundamentally based on 2 back-end platforms. One is around, I mentioned, patient engagement. So everything has to do with dealing with patients is something that we're going to be using and leveraging. And then also an enterprise data backbone. You can see some of the cases here where we have all of this mapped out. We're partnering with groups like MIT, and there's a global commission for rare diseases that we're working with. All of this ecosystem is very, very important to Takeda. It's a huge focus of our technology and digital strategy, and there are areas that we continue to work really, really hard on to not only leverage new business outcomes, but get a better and more cohesive digital and data flow, if you will, through existing business outcomes. So this brings it back to Takeda ID. So, and I talked before about how important trust is to Takeda. Trust is a word that we probably use quite a bit. It's really, really core and fundamental to Takeda. As I mentioned, our value system of patient trust, reputation, and business trust is really, really important. And I think it's a really good marriage, if you will, for Takeda ID, because trust is fundamentally what we want to do and what we want to enable when you're dealing digitally with patients. Patients need to feel trusted. They need to feel their relationship is trusted. They need to feel the data exchange is trusted. They need to feel their access is trusted. This is a fundamental game changer in the way that we can better enable these patient outcomes, but it's also important that we take this responsibility to do so in as secure and as private as a mode possible. And I'll talk a little bit later about how this is consistency is important too, because you have multiple different patients maybe participating in different parts of the various treatment areas that we work in, and physicians as well. And doing that consistently not only improves their experience, but also improves our experience providing those capabilities, developing new capabilities, and being able to govern and secure them properly. What you see here on the screen is how some of this stitches together. So you see the various parts of our value chain here. You see sometimes you see different modalities even. So we're all used to, I think, using a PC. Obviously, mobile devices have exploded here. You know, how many of us would have thought 3 years ago that we would be seeing a doctor through FaceTime on our mobile phone in some respects, using some sort of telemedicine appointment? But we also have devices that I mentioned before have to interact as well, whether it's something like I've mentioned before, like a Fitbit or an iWatch, or even something like an insulin pump, other things that help treat folks and can do so with a little bit more electronics involved. And then we have the medical community. We have our plasma-derived therapy collection areas. I'll talk a little bit about that, about how plasma-derived therapy, as its name infers, one of the biggest and most important assets that we can get and need to get to make better medicines in this space is to get the plasma of donors. And the last thing I'll say about the overall backbone within which Takeda ID works is the scale is a whole other level. So many of us are dealing with tens of thousands of internal workers when we're talking about workforce identity. But when you're getting into this externally facing identity, whether it's for patients, physicians, or both, you can potentially be talking in the millions.
Mm. So, Mike, there's a few things that stood out to me as you were speaking there. So it sounds like identity was really critical to enable some things like shifting from digital content to true digital services to delivering integrated experiences across many different touch points, online and offline, and really ultimately, creating long-term meaningful relationships with your healthcare providers, patients, and physicians. So, what does this really look like in practice? Can you give us an example of how Takeda ID has changed or impacted some of the initiatives you were talking about earlier?
Yeah, it's a great question, and what you see on the screen now are a number of actual examples that we are using and that we are actually deploying and enabling with Takeda ID. So I'm assuming that many of us are attending this session probably come with some sort of technology or business process responsibility. We're providing capabilities to support our business. And when you're doing so, and more of this nowadays is technology driven and digitally driven, you want to make sure that you're applying the right energy and actually reusing components and also making sure that the right people are delivering the right capabilities. So, first and foremost, our application developers and our business process owners in the various different therapeutic areas, or maybe the different patient engagement needs, can focus on that. And then they don't have to worry about building in identity or building in some sort of security controls within their application because we've built that as part of the platform. The platform is API based. So needs to build something that enables a trusted patient engagement model, say for gastrointestinal conditions, which may be different for building a patient engagement for folks dealing with oncology or cancer, which again may be different with somebody dealing on the neuroscience side with mental health conditions or something like Parkinson's. So they can focus their energy there where there's true business value and there's true business differentiators. And frankly, they can leave the API security and identity to the platform team, and that's what we've built. So we can give them a common set of tools to deploy the various components of registration, or in some parts of the world, consent is important. So consent management is part of that. So we build that in as part of the platform. It's shared across all the different therapeutic areas, all the different geographies. It's been built once and expanded and accessed many, many times. And you see here on the screen, you see is variability from areas like China, Japan. You can see the Nordics. You can see different parts of our product portfolio, whether it's Entyvio, which is our big gastrointestinal drug for ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease, or you can see other parts of this Taxara, which is another big one of our products, and all of this being API based. It can be used and leveraged by a number of different business modules, different look and feel if they want to have a different look and feel, but obviously built on the same core identity. So manages and allows the flexibility that a different therapeutic area may need, but also bases on the core fundamental trust, authentication, consent I mentioned before, privacy management. This helps us maintain our master data because we can get access to or get an understanding of how these patients interact with us, so we can build our capabilities there as well. So it gives us the best of both worlds to manage and enable both flexibility as well as the standard platform for control. I want to talk a little bit now about a different part of our business, which is an interesting and unique area because I mentioned before the therapeutic areas that we have for things like oncology, gastrointestinal, neuroscience, rare disease, and they all carry their own unique challenges. But we're one of the few pharmaceutical companies that also has a plasma-derived therapy business. And plasma-derived therapies are basically just like the name infers, is taking plasma from human blood and extrapolating out some very, very powerful life altering and treatment opportunities from within your plasma. And they can be used across multiple different therapeutic areas, and they can be used across multiple different conditions. But the number one asset that's needed to make plasma derived therapies is donated plasma. So many of us have probably donated blood through the American Red Cross. The plasma donation process is a little bit more involved than that. You have to visit the clinic a few times. We have clinics all over the country and all over the world. We're starting to do this in Europe and Asia as well, where you go and you donate your plasma. And the more plasma we get, the more medicine we can make. And we want repeat donors. If someone's really, really healthy and can provide some good plasma, that's somebody we want to come back, as often as is feasible and healthy for the individual. And we compensate these people as well. So it's something that, folks come in and they get a chance to get compensated for it as well. And so this part of the business, frankly, is very, very consumerish, I'll call it. It's not traditional pharma. We want folks to be enticed. We want to market the availability of these clinics. We want to market the safety of doing this. And we've built a number of capabilities, again, all leveraging the same Takeda ID platform, so that we know one donor gets one account and it can be leveraged across a number of different capabilities, whether it helps the phlebotomist in the clinic to actually get and manage the process better, so that the folks themselves feel welcome because they've used and have loyalty and all of the things that we can build in that, again, is more prevalent in a consumer model. And then we can link some of the stuff together based on the common framework of their identity and the APIs that we have built into these systems to get different value out of different parts of the value chain.
It's really inspiring to hear about how, you're finding these opportunities to create really patient-centric services that are, able to establish that trust and deliver new ideas and new connections with patients that really haven't been achieved before. So as we look at some of, you're talking about Takeda ID application across a lot of different applications, products, and services. What are some of the results that you've seen over the implementation and rollout that you've done over the past year?
Yeah, it's a great question. And there's a couple of different perspectives that we can obviously explore results. First and foremost, I would say from a back end CISO perspective, that's my job. Obviously the security and control and governance opportunities are much more robust, much more streamlined, much more consistent, and we can leverage the common platform because it's API driven, but still provide the flexibility that some of these various business units and therapeutic areas require. Like I said before, managing the experience of a GI patient is different than managing the experience of an oncology patient. And we can allow the folks closer to those business problems, address them, and still maintain the consistency and standards of a trusted account. And that could depend on, depending on the engagement, it could be varying levels of authentication. It could be varying levels of customization. And I also think that the time to market benefit is critical there. If you don't have to build this platform yourself because it's already been made available for you and all you're doing is some sort of API calls to it, we've seen a much quicker rollout of 5 to 10 or even a couple of dozen new modules leveraging Takeda ID in a matter of just a few months. So in the past, that might have taken a lot longer if everybody was asked to build identity into their own applications. We have one platform that they can all leverage, and it allows the real good flexibility and the integration across the board, especially when you start thinking about things like updating master data when there's HCPs involved, making sure that that data is updated, but also making sure that the patient information that we have is accurate. Patients can manage their own accounts and their own identities as necessary, and update that. And as soon as they update it, and we can manage consent consistently from a global data privacy perspective. So all of that, the benefits of the platform approach, allows us to again isolate the flexibility requirements of these applications, but still provide the security, privacy, and governance challenges of the overall identity externally facing platform in and of itself. So that's the benefits I would say from I'll call it an internal control stakeholders perspective. But let's talk a little bit about the patient's perspective. At the end of the day, that's why we're here. And we want to make sure that this is as patient driven and as patient aware as it can. So I've personally found through the journey of building this and enabling this, working with my team and working with other parts of my business constituents, that the patient experience digitally is becoming a really, really important in their ongoing health management challenges. And again, people with different conditions are having it a lot rougher, frankly. And the last thing a patient should have to worry about is the level of security within their engagements of the folks that they're trusting and entrusting to really, really help some challenging treatments and conditional areas. So we want to make sure that we not only provide that and enable that and almost make it a given that they can feel that they have that trusted experience. But I was also personally surprised to hear how many of our patients actually have treatment needs across different therapeutic areas. And they can do that consistently. We don't make them go through another registration process. We don't make them go through another authentication process. All of that is integrated, and they start to get a level of comfort that they're dealing with a partner like Takeda, who understands that patients shouldn't have to navigate through the complexity of different brand groups or different elements of our internal organizational structure. That should be a single unified approach there, and that's been a huge piece of positive feedback that we've heard directly from patients who have told us that they've seen and feel a fundamental difference in dealing with Takeda once they've started using some of these digital capabilities that Takeda ID is enabling. You see here some of the statistics. This is obviously growing on a almost on a weekly basis. You see some of the examples of, again, real world. I hope this slide gives you an indication of this is not vaporware. There are real users of this Takeda ID platform from across various businesses, various geographies, lining up to use this: Spain, Italy, Mexico. And we have a little under 900,000 Takeda ID users in the pipeline. That's a combination of patients and physicians. That number goes up on a weekly basis. And once we start getting more of I mentioned the plasma-derived therapy, which is more of a consumer-driven model. Once we get more of those plasma donors on board, that number will quickly grow into the millions. And the scalability opportunities, again, dealing with a partner like Okta, who's doing this for us in the cloud, we don't have to worry about performance, we don't have to worry about scale. It all just gets built, and it grows, and its flexibility and scales as we need it to.
So it's really incredible to me to hear about how you're seeing increased patient engagement already. And it really feels like this is just the beginning for Takeda and what you're going to be able to accomplish through digital. So if you were to look back and perhaps think about what advice you might give another leader who might be considering a similar project, what would you say are some of the lessons that you've learned, your takeaways, and maybe tell us a little bit about what's next?
Yeah, sure. It's really some exciting opportunity here. So first and foremost, I would advise that have the conversation with business leadership about the importance of making sure that they understand that how fundamentally dependent that they are, whether they know it or not, on a strong, robust, and external identity platform. This is something historically that many business leaders may go to different agencies or different marketing partners, different app development partners, and they all may build different solutions for different parts of the business, whether it's different therapeutic areas in our example or different geographies. Then the next thing you know is that when you are tasked with the security or the governance or data privacy responsibility, you're replicating that capability across a number of different platforms. So whether business leaders know it or not, all of this requires identity. That's the one common denominator, whether you're a patient, whether you're a physician, or even if you're a medical device that's looking to authenticate on behalf of a patient or a clinical trial participant. All of that requires identity. And building it API based, building it with standard and open solutions, building it with a cloud partner like Okta, so you don't have to worry about scale globally or size wise. So that's a big lesson: is have that conversation. Make sure that your business partners understand that whether they know it or not, how important identity is, and build it on a consistent platform so that you can reuse and think about the experience of the end user, whether it is a patient or a physician, and how important it is for them to make sure that they feel trust. I think we take for granted when we get on things like our consumer e-commerce shopping or whatever, or other parts of, I would say, our own personal lives, where the digital experience is something we almost take for granted because it's something we don't think about. That's not the case yet in healthcare. It may, and if it is, it's in pieces. You may trust your insurance company. You may trust whatever ID you're given by your hospital. But none of that is it's stitched together. It's almost always disjointed. So anything we can do to build that consistently and giving those patients that level of trust is important. And I think specific to the biopharmaceutical and healthcare sector, again, this is the whole industry is ripe for efficiency improvements. There's been a few economists that have said, other than education, the biopharmaceutical business process is one of the only business processes that's basically the same as it's been for the last 70 years. So I'm sure we can all imagine from a business perspective that doing anything the same that long has got to be ripe for improvement. And I think that the last thing I would say is think in terms of scale. Many of us, again, who have come up in the IT ranks or come up in some sort of technology ranks, we work so hard and spend so much time and energy on worrying about whether or not 10,000, 40,000, 70,000 users are happy. This is no longer about, in our case, 70,000 workers being happy. This is about 20 million patients potentially getting the healthcare they need in a trusted digital environment. And that's a pretty daunting responsibility. This is a responsibility that we've taken on and that most biopharmaceutical companies will be taking on in the near future that didn't exist 5 or 6 years ago. We historically did not deal directly with patients. We relied on partners to do that, whether it was through clinical trials or through the doctors for treatment. So having an ongoing health management relationship with patients is a pretty daunting responsibility, and one that a platform like Takeda ID and an external identity platform can allow you to deliver. I would say the last thing I would say in closing, in terms of what's next, I don't want to sound cheesy and say something as simple as the sky's the limit, but there are a number of other opportunities that we have in the pipeline here. We are adding 10, 20, 30 other use cases on a monthly basis. So we are getting different therapeutic areas, different geographies who want to leverage this platform and want to leverage a lot of the benefits that I mentioned. The other piece about this is modality. So when I say modality, I mean, when a human being uses something digitally, of course there's an account, but devices need to participate in this ecosystem as well, whether it's a therapeutic device, whether it's a diagnostic device, all of those pieces of this. And when we start talking about things like virtual clinical trials or other ongoing disease management opportunities that can leverage something digital, that's in the pipeline as well. And there are other parts of the ecosystem that I mentioned on the more consumer side with the plasma-derived therapy businesses that are constantly growing in innovation. So we foresee a future where we can truly be a digital partner to that ecosystem, and Takeda ID is the primary backbone for that. And we're continuing to build in other privacy assurances as well, because as we all know, data privacy regulations are constantly changing and evolving, and we're continually adding into the platform the ability to support those, whether it's consent, whether it's other forms of transparency or notifications. Having the platform allows us to continually evolve those modules as well. So we're excited about the future of Takeda ID, and we're excited about our continued opportunities to provide a trusted digital experience to both our patients and our physicians.
Mike, this has been just a really interesting and inspiring conversation. I want to thank you so much for coming back to Octane this year to tell us about how identity is playing a role in Takeda's evolving digital strategy, which is really exciting. We really appreciate your time today. And I want to say thank you as well to all of our attendees for your time. So let's do a little check-in to see if there are any questions in the chat.